Okay, the third way not to suck quite as much is admit things that you don't know. So I remember there was one time right after I had quit a law firm. So I finished law school, I was working at a law firm, I'd worked there for about 10 months, and I hated it. It was the worst job ever. Working at a law firm was not for me. It was checking pagination notes at 2,200 billable hours a year, and I joined a real estate law firm in late 2007, which for those of you who recall was not a good time to join a real estate law firm. And so after I left that so I quit that real estate law firm, about a month before I was married. I just gotten a mortgage, and I was looking at the possibility of another job. And there was a 501c3 that came to me and wanted to hire me, and they had a meeting scheduled with this big donor. And so we go into the meeting with the big donor, and we're talking with the donor, and the donor happens to be a big donor also to this journal in Israel, this magazine in Israel. And he asks me, have you ever heard of this magazine? And not wanting to look like a rube, I said, of course I've heard of that magazine. I had never heard of this magazine. No one has ever heard of this magazine. And the person sitting across from me says, well, what do you, I figured once I said that, he'd just be flattered and we'd move on with the conversation. Not so much. So he says, he turns to me and he says, well, what do you think of that magazine? And so I thought, what's the most generic thing I can say and get away with this, right? I said, well, I think it's great. I think it's a great magazine. He says, well, what do you think are the flaws with the magazine? And I thought, okay, well, how can I be really generic about this? So I figured, okay, well, you're always safe saying that a magazine is not intellectual enough, because even intellectual magazines think they're not intellectual enough, right? So I go, so I think that this magazine, it's a great magazine, but the critique I've heard, and maybe there's some truth to it, is that it's not quite intellectual enough. It turns out this is the most intellectual magazine in Israel. It is a peer-reviewed journal in Israel. I walk out of the meeting, and the guy who I was thinking about hiring me turns to me and goes, you have no idea what that magazine was, do you? And I said, yeah. From then on, I vowed that if I don't actually know anything about something, I will admit up front I don't know anything about something. And this is great in interpersonal relationships. It's good in life. It's just a good lesson, because our tendency always is to say that we know more than we do. And the reality is we know very, very little about most things. And it's okay to say that. It makes you more open to learning when you think you don't know as much as you even do. Okay.